Welcome back, everybody. I'm very pleased to see everybody here tonight. This is week 5 of our series. See some familiar faces. Good to see you. This semester, again, for those of you who've been with us this semester, and for those of you for whom this is the first night, I'm Christopher Vasso, professor of public policy here at Northeastern, and organizer and host of the series this semester. For those of you who have been here with us the entire semester, I remember I started off the first week with my mantra of, for most of us, the food system gives us what we want, when we want it, at a price we want to pay. For most of us, the food system is just terribly efficient, and terribly, in the good part of that, very efficient system that literally, if we want something, we can get it pretty quickly for most of us. And as I joked with my students earlier, in the age of Amazon Prime, it's just a matter of time for the drone delivers the food to my door. And it's really, Jeff Bezos is planning the drone army right now to deliver our food to us. But again, it's a terribly efficient system in the sense of scale, immediacy, convenience. Literally, if you want that pizza at 10 o'clock, you just get on the app, and next thing you know, the pizza's there in less than a half hour, or ish. And anything else you want delivered, especially if you live in a city. What happens though, but the great thing about so these systems are very efficient, as we're going to hear, that the efficiency depends on certain things happening. Chains, we're going to talk a lot about chains tonight. Linkages and chains that deliver that food to you, get it to a place where you can get it. But what happens if those chains are interrupted? What happens if there is a disaster, man-made or natural? What happens to the food system? What happens to access? And that's going to be the theme of tonight. And it's based on, in fact, real concerns that were themselves prompted, in part by Hurricane Katrina in 2005 that hit, obviously New Orleans, but really for Superstorm Sandy, which was 2012, which if it had taken a slightly different track, would have hit Boston, not New York, in its full head. And it led to, in fact, thinking in many cities in the United States, not just Boston, about, well, all right, what is the nature of the food system in Boston? Where does the food come from? Literally, where does it come from? And what would happen if there was a massive disruption in the system? Through nature, say, 4 weeks of a row of snowstorms. Couldn't happen here. Or a hurricane. Or in other cities, maybe earthquakes or even terrorist. What happens if transportation systems get disrupted? Power systems, et cetera. The sort of nuts and bolts of the efficiency system that few of us think about. And so it led to a study done by the Initiative for Competitive Intercity, Resilient Food for the City of Boston's Office of Food Initiatives, funded by the Kendall Foundation. And Andy Kendall, who's not here, should get a lot of thanks for this. And Andy Kendall's done a lot of work in the Kendall Foundation and food systems in the region. I'll hear his name more this semester. And it led to a study, Resilient Food Systems, Resilient Cities, Recommendations for the City of Boston. It was done in 2015. I was fortunate enough to be on the steering committee for it. And our guests tonight were all part of that in one way, shape, or form, or implementing parts of it in one way, shape, or form. And so we're very fortunate now to sort of hear about this study, what led to it, what's in it, how did some of the major players respond to that study and are following up on it. And again, in the back of our heads is really this question, where does your food come from, and what happens if there's a disruption? Especially for those at the lower end of the income ladder. That's what we're also going to talk about. So our 4 guests tonight, in order of appearance. Austin Miwas, Senior Research Analyst at the Initiative for Competitive Intercity, and one of the co-authors, if you will, of the original 2015 study. His research explores urban food resilience and economic development issues in the U.S. inner cities. At ICIC, he helped develop a framework for analyzing food system resilience in the United States in the metropolitan context that can be used by city leaders to identify and address their food system vulnerabilities. This framework was first used to analyze the resilience of Boston food system in 2015. More recently, Austin co-authored with Kim Zuley, and think it was you and Kim for the most part, yeah. The resilience of America's food systems, evidence from 5 cities, which extended the analysis from Boston to Los Angeles, New Orleans, New York City, Madison, Wisconsin, and Portland, Maine. Prior to ICIC, Austin worked as a researcher at Boston College, where he analyzed environmental data and produced award-winning GIS maps. He holds a bachelor's in economics and geology from Tulane University, where he worked with scientists and local nonprofits to rebuild the city of New Orleans after Katrina, and he completed an MS in geology at Boston College. He'll be followed by Stacy Wiggins. Stacy is Senior Vice President of Operations at Stop and Shop, which I think everybody who lives in the city of Boston knows is the dominant retailer in the city of Boston in terms of grocery stores, probably through planning and history. Former Mayor Menino really tried to make that happen. In her current role, she oversees the operations, financial performance, and merchandising aspects for 213 stores in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and parts of Connecticut. Prior to joining Stop and Shop New England Division in 2015, she held various executive positions at several Ahold USA. Ahold is the holding company of which Stop and Shop is part. Ahold USA divisions, including Regional Vice President of Operations for Giant Foods, which is Mid-Atlantic, and Regional Vice President of Operations for Stop and Shop Metro. Is that New York City? New York. New York, yeah. Earlier, she worked in increasingly responsible roles for Walmart, where she began her retail career as an hourly associate at a store in Mechanicsburg, PA. And I know where Mechanicsburg is, and just goes to show you can work your way up from the shop floor. She's a veteran of the United States Army, and she was named Progressive Grocer as one of the top women in grocery in 2011 and 2013. She recently served on the New Jersey Food Council Board of Directors and is a former member of the Delaware Food Council and Salisbury, Maryland Chamber of Commerce. After Stacy, Cheryl Schondek since 2014, has been the Vice President of Food Acquisition and Supply Chain for the Greater Boston Food Bank, which, as many of you know, is down in the Newmarket area near the Suffolk County Jail, right tucked in by 93. That's the story we're going to talk about. Which oversees the acquisition and distribution of all food, as well as managing the food acquisition and warehouse building, facilities, and transportation teams for the food bank. Prior to that, Cheryl had a career at Shaw's Star Markets for more than 25 years, managing perishable, non-perishable private brand supply chain and product management departments. She's an executive board member of the New England Food Foundation and the New England region of the Network for Executive Women, and a founding member of the New England Produce Council. She earned an undergraduate and graduate degree from the University of Vermont and Bridgewater State College, completed coursework in MIT Executive Supply Chain and Strategic Management sessions, and has a certificate in Produce Management from Cornell University. That's exhausting. Yeah.
I'm old.
I thought getting a PhD was hard. Finally, David Andre. David is Director for Food and Nutrition Programs for the American Red Cross of Massachusetts. Over 20 years of experience working in food assistance programs. He has worked in the food and nutrition programs for 14 years, responsible for planning and development, resource allocation, financial management, and all program operations. He is on the American Red Cross of Massachusetts senior leadership team and is former board member for My Brother's Table in Lynn, Massachusetts. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in History from St. Thomas University in Miami, Florida, and a Master of Science in Hotel and Food Service Management from Florida International. So we have 4 really great guests tonight, and it's a great lineup, and let's start with Austin Enos.
Well, thanks so much for having me here today. Chris invited me here today to talk about some of our research we've been doing the last 3 or 4 years in food resilience, and in particular the work we've been doing with the city of Boston, which Chris has been an instrumental part of, having served on the steering committee of that research. So just quickly, I just wanted to give you an introduction to ICIC. So we're the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City. And we're primarily a nonprofit research organization. We're actually located right down the street in Dudley Square, but our work is national. And most of our research throughout the 25 years or so that we've been around has been centered around inner city economies and understanding what resources businesses need in the inner city to grow and scale. But maybe in the last 5–10 years or so, cities have begun to rethink how they think about cities, and they're not just concerned about their economy or the strength of the economy, but also how resilient they are to certain types of disasters or risks, and how cities might respond to these disasters. And a lot of this has been growing with the increased realization of climate change, as Chris mentioned, Hurricane Katrina, Superstorm Sandy, and even in Boston, back when this study was actually initiated in 2015, like midway through the study, we had the February snowstorms where we got record snowstorms. Most of us couldn't get to work most days, and that really just highlighted and brought close to home why it's important to think about the resilience of cities. And just as a note, Boston's one of the first cities to think about food systems. So when cities think about resilience, they're really concerned about sort of the sort of obvious systems that you think about. So how can cities ensure that there's power or fuel supplies or public transportation is working or people are able to access roads. But people haven't, to this point, of thinking about resilience, haven't really thought about food systems. But as we know, today's a perfect example. Food systems are really critical, especially during a shock or a natural disaster. So I'm sure many people right now are flooding the stores right now in preparation for tomorrow's snowstorm. And that's exactly sort of the point behind this research is how do we ensure that food is able to get to our plates, both coming into the retail store, and how do we make sure that residents are able to purchase food. So just to begin, I just wanted to introduce a couple of concepts, because I know resilience, and especially food system resilience, isn't particularly well known across the board. So I just wanted to define a few terms. So when we at ICIC think about resilient food systems, we're really concerned about how quickly this food system can get back to normal operations right after a disaster or shock. And this example is from our research in New Orleans that really demonstrates why it's important for a city to have a resilient food system and how this might differ by neighborhood. So on this axis, on the y-axis of this graph is the number of supermarkets, and on the x-axis is time. So right after Hurricane Katrina hit, all of the grocery stores closed, and they were slow to reopen, and finally, nearly a decade later, so just in the past year or so, they finally reached their pre-Katrina levels of supermarkets. So it actually took 10 years for grocery stores to reopen. And I'm looking at Jackson right now, who helped with some of this research, so thanks a lot, Jackson. So as you can see, some of the neighborhoods were really quick to reopen within the first few months or right when the population was starting to come back to Katrina. But other neighborhoods, especially those that were hardest hit, like the 7th Ward, it took up to 8–9 years for grocery stores to reopen. So what factors lead to our food access or food availability, and how do we ensure that we're able to access food? So at ICIC, we first with our Boston work, and we just released new research on this framework. We released a framework that looks at an urban food system and how you can analyze risk and identify areas where there may be vulnerabilities for getting food into the city. So we're really focused on 3 major components, and these are really the areas that a city can reasonably address their food system resilience. And that starts here in the top left with food processing, so how food is manufactured, and we want to understand where the risks are in manufacturing and processing. And the way we identify risk is just, is it located in an area vulnerable for disaster? So in Boston, is there potential for a snowstorm to hit Boston? How would these be impacted? How would the food processors be impacted? Or in the case of Hurricane Sandy, would any of the area's processors be likely to flood because of the storm surge? So that's how we're looking at risk. And just moving down this list, so processing, the city really can't do much about processing, as I'm sure Chris has really grilled the point in the past few weeks that most of the food coming into Boston isn't actually processed anywhere near Boston. It's often produced either nationally, internationally, and our research really shows that there are only a few food items that can be impacted locally, and one of them, and one that I'll talk about today, is milk, which is another one of those items that during a snowstorm everyone has to rush out to get the milk. And that's because it has a short shelf life, and because of that it's generally processed close to home, so it's more likely to be at risk to a localized disaster. So since we know most of the food is not actually produced in Boston, so then what actually matters for resilience? And that comes down to transportation and distribution. So how does food get into the city? So where is it warehoused? What roads does it take to get into the city? And then the last component is the food access side. So our food retail stores, are there abundant food retail stores? Can residents access these food retail stores, and how able are they quickly to reopen after a disaster? And then sort of on the flip side of food access is how residents are able to purchase food, and that's where the whole topic of food insecurity comes into play. So do residents have the resources to purchase food both in normal times? And our research has shown that after disaster strikes, residents are more likely to become more food insecure as they either incur food or disaster-related expenses like a loss of job or loss of property. So that's sort of the underlying framework of how we think about food system resilience. And then I'll just quickly go through sort of the high-level findings for our Boston work. So I'll just go through the list now, starting with food processing. So as I said before, for our Boston research, we looked at a number of food items. I think it was 6 of them. But the main component the main item that we really focused on was milk because of its regionality. So we looked at a radius of 75 miles outside the city of Boston, and this is essentially the average size of a hurricane. So if a hurricane was to hit Boston, what processing plants might be considered at risk to either closure from wind damage or not being able to get into the city because of road closures. And then we found that there are 12 milk processing plants within that 75-mile radius. And what's interesting about milk production is that it's mostly produced by 2 companies, so Hood and Suiza, which produces Gaelic Farms milk. And of those 12 processing plants, 2 of them are owned by Suiza and none are from Hood. So there's a potential vulnerability for milk just because it's concentrated sort of regionally, but also by just a few processors. So just moving down to food distribution. So what we did, we looked at distribution of 2 types of warehouses. So food retail stores generally get their food from either a primary supplier. So if you think about Stop and Shop, they have their own warehouse supplier that they operate that supplies the majority of the food. Whereas corner stores and smaller grocery stores generally rely on local warehouse suppliers that are located within either the city of Boston or just outside the city. So we mapped both of those. So on this map right here are all the warehouse suppliers in Boston. And then this blue area is what the Boston Harbor Association estimates is the potential for a Sandy-sized storm surge in Boston. So what we found is about 45% of warehouses in the city are vulnerable to flooding. A lot of them are clustered in a couple of areas. One is Newmarket, where the food bank is located, and then the waterfront where a lot of frozen food is distributed. And then Chelsea and Everett, just outside of this disaster zone, is one of the big locations for fresh produce into the city. And then looking at, one other thing, when we talk about supermarket warehouse suppliers, in general, they're mostly located outside the city. So when they come into the city, they mostly come by truck, which means transportation networks are really critical for getting food into the city. And if you look at the map, most of the warehouse suppliers, which are mapped here, but most of the warehouse suppliers for supermarkets are located north and south of the city. And if you look at the one north-south route highway going into the city, pretty much all of it is located in an area that can be flooded by Sandy. So that's where we start to see the vulnerabilities in Boston's food system. And then at the retail level, so now we want to know where vulnerabilities might exist with food access. So first, are there abundant grocery stores? And in general, the answer in Boston is yes. I don't know how much you guys have worked with food deserts in Boston, but there are just very few areas without any access to grocery stores. But there are some neighborhoods in particular where grocery stores might be vulnerable to flooding, so they're located in that blue area in the previous screen. And those pop out as Dorchester, Roxbury, and East Boston. So these areas might experience flooding that could close grocery stores, and in general, they tend to have fewer grocery stores than the rest of the city. And then on the flip side is, how do people access food? And then looking at food insecurity. So then we mapped out food insecure neighborhoods, and for this we're using SNAP rates as a proxy. And the neighborhoods in red are neighborhoods with higher rates of SNAP usage in the neighborhood. And the dark red are higher areas of SNAP usage plus those areas of vulnerable retail. So again, neighborhoods like Dorchester, East Boston, and Roxbury stick out as being vulnerable. And just so quickly, with these findings, what do we recommend to the city? I'll just go quickly through these, and we can talk about them in the Q&A. But at a high level, the study really showed that there was a greater need for coordination with the public and private food system, which we can talk about, I'm sure Cheryl and Stacy are going to talk about. And then there's just investment in this critical food infrastructure. So roads, we need to understand what the vulnerabilities are, how we can mitigate that vulnerability. And for distribution centers, what are the actual vulnerable distribution centers and how we can mitigate those as well. And then finally, just quickly, an update of where we are. So this study came out in 2015. And since then, the city has hired a chief resilience officer that's focused on resilience efforts. And they'll be releasing a strategy around resilience overall in this year. The MAPC has started a task force to look at food distribution systems, especially in Chelsea and Everett. And they're continuing research to figure out how they can make these distribution centers more resilient. And then just finally, there's some additional research coming from the Office of Food Initiatives. And then what we've been learning through all of our research, not just in Boston, but in other cities, is that resilience planning takes a lot of time. And I'm sure we'll talk about it. There's just such uncertainty around risk that it's hard to grasp your head around these concepts, and making the push for better investment in infrastructure. And then just lastly, I'll plug our report. It's on our website at icic.org if you're interested in reading some more. So thank you.
That's great. I want to give you a little bit of background about Stop and Shop. I'm sure that you guys have been in a Stop and Shop, or maybe it's your store of choice. But if it's not, let me give you a little bit of background. So we had our first store open up over a century ago in Somerville, Mass. And what started out as a single corner neighborhood grocery store today has turned into a large facility. And so you heard Chris talk about earlier that we have over 213 stores in the New England area, and not all of those reside in Massachusetts, but we do currently have 213. We employ over 32,000 associates in all of those locations, in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And really, if you think about our values as a company, we haven't changed. So in 1914, we opened up, started our business 103 years ago, and our values have pretty much stayed the same. And that's really to create a better place to shop, a better place to work for our associates, and to become a better neighbor. And that is still our motto today. Most of you probably have heard, we were with Ahold, so you heard Chris talk about that I am with Ahold. But we recently just merged with Delhaize as well. So now we are considered Ahold Delhaize. And what that means is that we've got all these different brands with us. We have Stop and Shop of New England, Stop and Shop of New York Metro. We have Giant of Landover, which is located in Maryland. Giant of Carlisle, which is in Carlisle, PA. And now we've added to our family Hannaford's and Food Lion, which are located south and up in New York, and I believe that's pretty much Virginia, so they're outside of this operating area. But we're very excited that we've grown that. Let's talk about our stores for a little bit. So I said that we operate in Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts we have 130 stores, and we will continue to grow that store base. We have 55 stores in Connecticut and 26 stores in Rhode Island. And our average store size is 60,000 square feet. And keep in mind that we do have smaller versions, and we do have a little bit larger versions of the stores, but our average is 60,000. And we employ up to 120 full-time and part-time associates within those facilities. And again, each facility, depending on the size, would depend on how many associates work in there. And as you know, if you have shopped in our stores at any given time, we have a full variety of offerings. So we have produce, we have floral, we have meat, we have seafood, we have deli, we have bake shop, we have HBC, which is your hair products and that sort of thing. In a lot of locations, we also offer pharmacy. We offer gas in a lot of different locations, obviously frozen, and the all-important department of dairy, which I'm going to talk to here in a little bit about how important that is. We have a large variety of customers. So our customer base ranges from different household incomes, from dense urban areas all the way to the suburbs. And we service over 6 million customers a week. Think about that. That is a large number. 6 million customers coming through all those buildings in a week. Our effort to be a better neighbor, we really strive to be a better neighbor in all the communities that we operate in. And we are very proud to be partners with 6 of the New England food banks, including the Greater Boston Food Bank. We have been a partner of the Boston Food Bank for 30 years, and Stop and Shop is the top donor, the top food donor to our partners, which we're very excited about. We donate an average of 2 million pounds of food in a year for the past 20 years. And in 2016, we donated over $14 million in cash and product to our food bank partners, as well as hundreds throughout the New England division, so not just for the Greater Boston Food Bank. And in addition to that, our customers also help us support the local food banks by donating an average of over $1 million annually for the past 25 years through a funding that we call Food for Friends. And again, if you stop in our stores, you will know what the Food for Friends is. And we actually do that once a year for our customers. Now, why did I tell you all of that? I know we're here to talk about contingency, and we're here to talk about how will we make it better if we are in a natural disaster. But it was important for me to let you guys know exactly what the company is, what we stand for, and what's important to us. And really the most important thing for us is to be there for the communities. Our state of emergency contingency plan it changes every single day. And I'm going to take today for an example. We talked about the snowstorm that's coming tomorrow. Yesterday, what was the forecast? It was 1 to 3, which in this area, 1 to 3 means nothing, right? It's a dusting, people get on with their lives. It's not like in North Carolina where it is already declared a natural disaster. So 1 to 3, we don't really change our way of business. We talk about, do we need to get additional milk orders into the stores? Do we need to get additional bread? Because for some reason, everybody thinks they are going to run out of milk, bread, and water. That is not going to happen, even in a natural disaster, and I'll explain why. But as little as yesterday, we looked, we saw that the weather forecast was changing, and so we had to change our plans immediately. So what we did is instead of saying it's not going to be a big deal, now we're going to get 8 to 12, and now I guess it's 8 to 14 inches, which could be a big deal. We have the ability to order additional product, to get additional trucks on the road, to make sure every single store in the New England division got a perishable load and got a grocery load. And that's important because if we can't get our trucks on the road, we don't have the product inside the stores for the customers for whenever we do have these snowstorms. But the flexibility that we have to make those adjustments is great. We also had the ability to contact our milk vendors and say, we need additional pallets brought into the stores. We need additional bread brought into the stores. We need truckloads of water brought into the stores. We need all this product, and we have enough vendors support out there that all we have to do is make a phone call and get the product into the buildings. So we do have contingency plans. We have contingency plans for a small snowstorm. We also have contingency plans for a major event, and I'm going to get into Hurricane Sandy here in just 1 second. I talked about the vendor partnership that we have. We also have a large variety of distribution centers. We own our own in Freetown, but we have access to some in Chester, New York, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in Landover, and Johnstown, Maryland. We also now have them up in Scarborough, Maine, and we have them in Salisbury, North Carolina, because of our recent merger. So we have access to many, many distribution centers where all we have to do is place a phone call and say we need some help. And I'll explain how all that works within our system. As an emergency food provider, we work very closely with our local officials. It's extremely important to us that if there is a natural disaster, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a snowstorm, whatever the case may be, that we understand completely what the travel arrangements are going to be. Are there going to be restrictions? Because we have to get the trucks on the road. And whether it's that we get the trucks on the road 24 hours in advance, or if we're told that there's not going to be a state of emergency, we'll have time to get those trucks on the road and get them into the stores prior to anything major happening. For us, that's extremely important. I think it's also important to really stress that anytime there has been a major disaster, Stop and Shop has been known to stay open. And we don't do it at the expense of our associates' safety. We stay open because people want us to stay open. Our associates want us to stay open, and we take pride in taking care of the communities that we reside in. And for me and for the company, it's a matter of building trust, and our customers trust us. They trust the fact that we are going to be there for them in the time of need. We have a wide variety of communication style that we get, that we communicate out to the field or out to the customers. So we recently have started using social media a little more frequently. We have the email system that if you have the Stop and Shop card and you sign up for email, you will automatically get an email letting you know what the updated hours are, if we have to adjust any of our hours due to an emergency. And then of course, if you come into the buildings, we have live people there who can also, we have the hours posted. But it's also extremely important to be able to communicate how we're going to operate through a state of emergency. So, let me tell you about Hurricane Sandy. You guys want to hear about it? Yep. Can you tell I'm not from Boston? I refrain myself from saying y'all want to hear about it. So I happened to be in New Jersey at the time, in 2012. And I had reported to New Jersey. I was a brand new regional vice president for Stop and Shop of New York. And I had reported there 3 weeks earlier. And I thought, what a great deal. I get to be on the Jersey Shore. And this is going to be a fun time. until the hurricane hit. And it was an event like none other. And I've been in this, this type of business for 25 years, been through a lot of different events. But until you've actually been into a natural disaster, you have no idea what you're in for. You know, we pride ourselves on staying open. I already told you that. And you think that you have all the preparation in the world. We treated Hurricane Sandy like it was just another storm, like it was just another event. We got the trucks in early, just like I told you the process. We got the food on the shelves. We got our associates home safely. We kept the stores open. And then the eye of the storm came over, and it hit us pretty hard. And we actually had 2 stores on the Jersey Shore that got flooded, and we had to absolutely close down, gut them out, because there was 4 feet of water inside the stores. But the best part about it, those were the only 2 stores that shut down in New Jersey. We also had some in New York City that had to shut down as well. All the other competition around us shut their doors. The minute they heard it was coming, they closed the doors. Stop and Shop was the only ones that stayed open. We couldn't sell fresh product, guys. Power went out, we lost power for 2 weeks. So you had no way to keep the refrigeration going, but we were open for the public for dry goods. And we also became a destination for people to come and charge their cell phones because they had no power at home, or to charge whatever it was that they needed, or to even use our facilities for water, because it was that bad. What did we learn from it? We thought we had everything in place. I'm going to tell you, we joked about it, and we called ourselves a command center because we all sat in different rooms in different areas of of New Jersey and New York, and we constantly got on the phone and we said, I had 91 stores total, 80 of those 91 all went down without power all at the same time. So I was sitting there on a drive board saying, okay, I just got the call, this one's down, oh, this one's up, good. Now this one's down, oh, that one's back down, this one's up, and that was what we looked like. And then we had to really start to worry about how were we going to stay in business and take care of our customers. It wasn't about the sales for us, it was really about taking care of the customers. And so we took all of our learnings from that. We built a contingency plan that now can be adjusted for any event that we have. And again, we have the ability, we have the resources to pull milk in from other areas of our company, to pull that bread in, to pull additional trucks in, to get generators into the stores to keep our business up and running. So I feel very strongly about what we have as a contingency. Is it rock solid? Changes constantly. With every event that happens, it changes constantly. But it's there, and you guys can trust that Stop and Shop will be there in the time of need. So thank you.